Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Inhaled Insulin. Fast in, fast out, fits your lifestyle. By Dexcom, take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by ViviCap, confidence on the go, keeping your insulin protected from heat and cold.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Welcome and Happy New Year. This week, what will 2023 bring for diabetes technology? We bring our best guesses to the table and we take a look back at what we thought would happen, what we said last year. As always, I am your host, Stacey Sims, and I'm just thrilled to be jumping back in for another year of the podcast. If you are new, welcome. We aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. My son Benny was diagnosed with type 1 right before he turned 2. He just turned 18. My husband lives with type 2. I do not have diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting, and that is why I started the podcast. This is a longer than usual episode, so I want to jump right in and kind of explain what you're going to hear this week. It's two different interviews stitched together. You're going to hear short excerpts from last year's prediction episode. We taped that in December of 2021 with Mike Hoskins. Mike is currently an editor at Healthline. He was the managing editor at DiabetesMine. I will link up that full prediction episode from last year in the show notes for this one. You're also going to hear my interview with Chris Wilson, who I describe as a longtime advocate and information junkie. He just marked 25 years living with type 1. Chris will tell you that for much of his time with diabetes, he didn't have insurance. He didn't use a lot of the more advanced technology. Now he really follows it all very closely. He takes part in clinical trials, and he's actually designing his own, I think, pretty incredible sounding DIY closed loop features. And hopefully he can share more with us in the future. None of us have financial stakes in these companies. I mean, we might have some stocks that are buried in mutual funds, but we do not own individual stakes in these companies. And our information is based on whatever is publicly available. So please do not invest or switch devices because of what you hear. This is a lot of good-natured conjecture, let's call it. Mike was due to join me and Chris in making the 2023 predictions, but life had other plans. Even so, I think you get a really good feel for our outlooks. And finally, you need to know that Chris and I were talking on a Twitter space. This is my first time ever hosting, my first time ever recording. So the sound quality isn't quite up to my usual standards. I think it's listenable, but I do apologize. You know, I spent 20 years in professional broadcasting and that kind of stuff makes me bananas. All right, let's jump in. This time last year, we were waiting for FDA approval for Omnipod 5 and for Tandem's mobile bolus. Tandem had also announced a pipeline that included a small pump called the Mobi. So what did Mike and I think was going to happen?
I think we'll see Tandem and Omnipod pretty in short order close together in Q1. I mean, I think there's still a chance we could see Tandem approved by FDA by the end of this year. Because even though FDA doesn't acknowledge that they do this. They try to clean up their document.
Yes. End of the year is a mess.
Before the end of the quarter or by the end of a year in particular.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you. And I'm going to put a date on mine because I like to live dangerously. I'm going to say that one of them, I'll put a bullseye on Tandem. I think Tandem is going to come through on the 22nd of December. And I'll tell you why. It's because I do not have a newscast scheduled for that day. So I'm going to say that right before Christmas, Tandem gets a big present. Santa comes to town from the FDA and says, bolus by phone, you're in. And then the big surprise, the first week of January for Omnipod 5. I do think they're going to come back to back. But I think that they will file what we used to call T-Sport and we're now calling Mobi.
Right.
I think they will file for approval next year. But it certainly doesn't seem like you can't get approval till you file.
I think with Tandem, the Mobi or, what was T-Sport, I think we'll see that filed probably by the middle of next year.
How did we do? Not too bad there. Omnipod 5 was approved in late January 2022. Tandem Mobile Bolus in mid-February. So we kind of got that they would come closer together at least. And we were about a month off. We were way off on the Mobi, which was submitted for FDA approval in late fall of 2022, just a couple of weeks ago. And recent news has us asking questions about Tandem's pipeline. They announced the purchase of AMF, the makers of Sigi Pump. We did an episode with this company in February of 2022. You can go back and listen to that. They are a patch pump, but they're very unique in that the pump itself is not disposable. You get 2 rechargeable kind of pod pumps, and it is the infusion set where it attaches that is disposable. It has FDA breakthrough designation, and it looks like it's a direct competitor for Tandem to Omnipod. My question and the speculation for you, Chris, is Tandem now has a patch pump in its repertoire. What happens to Mobi? What happens to this pump that we've been following for years and years, which was the T-Sport, now is the Mobi? Any predictions? Will Tandem have 2 sort of patch pumps?
I can see the 2 products actually sort of converging. When Tandem announced Mobi, it was obviously initially going to launch with the super short infusion set tubing, just a couple of inches, with the pump worn very, very close to the infusion site. And they did announce that they were working towards a fully tubeless option where it would actually snap into the base, almost similar to or almost identical to what the Sigi pump sort of does. So I can see the 2 products maybe converging eventually and becoming a sort of single line. And it may even just be that, what Tandem's really after is that snap into the infusion set sort of work that AMF has already done
right
for the Sigi pump.
Right.
Rather than reinventing the wheel for themselves when they move to add that feature on to the Mobi.
Let's talk about Dexcom G7. First, what did we think was going to happen? You'll recall in late 2021, the company had announced it would submit in Europe first for approval, which it did, and that it was approved in the US in late 2022, just a few weeks ago. So here is our prediction from last year. I'm going to say approval for the G7 in the US, and we're getting ahead of ourselves here, Mike, because they haven't even filed yet. I'm going to say September. I'll put a pin in September.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I think it's sometime latter part of next year. Dexcom has traditionally moved pretty quickly in normal times, so we'll see.
I just wonder if it'll only be approved for back of arm use. That would be so ironic if the G7 came out and was like, no, you can't put it elsewhere. I mean, obviously people will put it wherever the heck they want. All right, we missed the timeline by 2 to 3 months, but I am not going to lie. This is the prediction I am most excited about getting right. G7 is only approved in arms. I spoke about that with Jake Leach on our episode a couple of weeks ago. It's pretty clear that they know people are going to put this device pretty much wherever they want to. But I thought that was really interesting. It was kind of a throwaway line on my part last year, and it was right. Okay, but what is next for interoperability with the G7? And my question is, and this is kind of a gimme because they've all already said this, when are we going to see this working with Tandem and Omnipod, with its partners? They've said probably May and June. I was interested that Jake Leach said in his interview with me, probably Tandem first and then Omnipod. And that has nothing to do with Dexcom, really. It's more those companies. Any insight on that, Chris?
My gut feeling is that Tandem is farther along in the integration process and has been working on it longer. So they've kind of got a head start. So that's probably why Jake thought that Tandem would get it first.
I'm going to pop back in for a moment here and say that I'm going to add a prediction. I think this is going to take longer than we as consumers are thinking for a wide rollout. So I'm actually going to say August for Tandem and October for Omnipod. I do hope I'm wrong. There are a lot of people predicting earlier than that, but I'm just hearing some things that it might just take longer than we had originally thought. So fingers crossed I'm wrong, right? Let's talk about Libre 3. I'm not as familiar with this product line. I do know that the apps for Libre 2 are finally available. So do we think Libre 3 is coming soon?
Probably not. I mean, I feel like I don't think they've filed with FDA for Libre 3 at this point. Most optimistically, I'd say the end of next year. And that's extremely generous because they just don't really update you on what their timeline really looks like. If I had to guess, I think they're probably trying to solve first their issue with the Libre 2 designation not being officially able to be used with insulin delivery devices like Control-IQ, Tandem's Control-IQ. I think they're trying to address that first, if I had to guess. And once they do that, then they will move forward on Libre 3.
They did not address it. They simply moved on. Libre 3 was approved at the end of May. Chris and I talked about the limitations and challenges it faces going forward.
My husband, who lives with type 2, got a sample. I don't know, the PR people sent it to us to see if we wanted to try it. And he likes it a lot. It's tiny, but it is having that problem. It's interesting, right? It's got the problem with vitamin C that I don't really understand exactly how to explain that if you're not familiar, but kind of, Dexcom had trouble with Tylenol. The Eversense implantable CGM has issues with, it's not amoxicillin. It's another type of antibiotic. They have problems with that. And so until Libre 3 figures that out, they're not going to get the ICGM designation, is my understanding, right?
That was my understanding as well. And actually, I think they are technically approved as an ICGM, but with a special carve-out that it is not approved to be used with automated insulin delivery.
Interesting. The heck does
Which
that
I
mean?
thought was sort of part of the ICGM designation, but that was what I read into the discussions of the approval that was there. Then I actually did dig into the FDA's database and look at the specific approval, and there is a note in there that this is specifically not to, but it's in the class of the ICGMs, but with an exception that it's not approved for use with automated insulin delivery.
That's so interesting, especially when you look at the partnership that they have now with it's Ypsomed, right, in Germany. So this is a closed loop with Libre 3, Ypsomed, and I always say it wrong. It's the CAM APS? I don't remember. It's one of the software systems that they've got over in Europe. They are using it with an AID system in Germany, so we'll see how that goes. I imagine that people are happy to have a choice there.
Right. One thing that sort of seems to be universal here is that we are sort of moving towards people having more choices for how they want to deliver their insulin, control the insulin delivery, all of that stuff, which is a good thing since there is no real one size fits all. Nothing works well for everyone.
No, that'd be great. I mean, we can talk a little bit more about actual, as I like to call it, the interoperability or the Mr. Potato Head version of diabetes. That's what I want. Give me all those parts and let me put them how I want them.
Lots more to come, including conversations about Tidepool Loop, about Beta Bionics, and about non-invasive glucose monitoring, just slapping a watch on your wrist or something like that. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afreza. And I know you have a lot of questions about Afreza because every time I mention it, I get emails and I get messages. So what is it all about? Afreza is an ultra-rapid-acting mealtime insulin. You breathe it in using an oral inhaler. Afreza gives you the flexibility to eat when you want while providing proven blood sugar control. Afreza's ultra-rapid action allows you to inhale your insulin right when food arrives, even unexpectedly, so you can be spontaneous but still in control without the need for injections at mealtime. Find out more, see if Afreza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afreza logo. Afreza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you've ever smoked, ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afreza. Afreza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on afreza.com/safety. Okay, so I'm just going to predict, I think that the 780G will get approval in the US 1 week after Omnipod 5. I think it'll literally be a week. So I'm going to say, going from my earlier predictions, mid-January for the Medtronic 780. But I think it'll be about a week to 10 days.
And since we're playing Price is Right rules, I'll go actually with spring. I think we're going to see approval sometime in the spring, whether it's early or late. Yeah, but before ADA, I think we'll see approval of 780G.
Nope, not even close. The Medtronic 780G, as of this taping, is still not approved, and it was submitted in the spring of 2021.
Is this going to happen before another Medtronic model is made? In other words, will the next one lap it?
I mean, I'm not sure that there's really a whole lot beyond the 780 truly in the pipeline that I've seen or heard rumblings about or anything along those lines. It almost seems like with the automated insulin delivery, this current class of systems, the advanced hybrid closed loop, AHCL, which is the category into which Control-IQ and Omnipod 5 and the 780G all fall. It seems that things have sort of plateaued there, at least for a little while. And it may be sort of a pause until we get the next big thing. I mean, most of the innovation that I'm seeing coming in the next year or so is, I think, largely going to be device form factors, small incremental improvements, software enhancements. Obviously, with the Mobi coming with Tandem, that also potentially means that they may be rolling out full control of the T-Slim pumps from a phone as well. Not just the remote bolus, but the ability to do other things with the pump.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Right, that's what they were moving towards, was full control.
Let's talk about the iLet pump, which, my goodness, has just been kind of a dream in the diabetes community for a very long time. This is the dual-chambered pump, but the thinking is it will be submitted to the FDA as a single-chambered pump, just insulin, not glucagon yet.
We are dealing with, the COVID era delays at FDA and everything, clinical trials and everything else. So I have no clue at this point where iLet is. But I'm on the same page. Last I had heard, they were hoping to file the single hormone version in this coming up year.
It's just so amazing because I know everybody's excited about dual chamber. The big difference to me is that I believe that with iLet, you tell it how much you weigh, and that's it. Yeah. And so there's no basal settings. There's no correction factor. It kind of just learns you, and that's it. The people who've been in the clinical trials have been really happy about the hands-off approach, and it seems to do very well. So to me, that's just like, I don't know. It seems maybe in a few years we'll look back and say, well, why didn't they always do it that way? But it just seems like so super flying car kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I just want to get through these other device systems that are in front of the FDA, and that is Bionics and Tidepool Loop. And Chris, I'm sure your eagle eyes have spotted that Bionics, makers of the iLet pump, have changed some of their social media cover photos and graphics in the last couple of days, which, doesn't mean anything, but is always interesting to see. We're waiting for approval or more questions about Bionics and Tidepool Loop. Any predictions there?
I think the iLet will probably get approved and come to market. My thoughts there are that it's probably going to face an uphill battle getting reimbursement coverage, at least in the US, just because the market is already pretty well saturated. The insurance companies don't want to develop relationships with 15 different companies that all do the same thing. They'd rather contract with one or two or three and just be done with it. And obviously, Bionics would be another player in that market. I think it's definitely going to offer some benefits for a lot of people, especially people that want to be super hands-off about their diabetes management. It does have the limitations of the limited insulin capacity. And it's also, obviously, I honestly think in their trial, they probably would have been better served if they hadn't done comparisons with other AHCL systems.
I think if Bionics, with their hands-off, as you said, system, where you just have to announce that you're eating, if they could go after an underserved community and an underserved part of the market that has not used an AID system, as you said, Chris, has just used MDI, or maybe even like my friend I talked to last week, who is still on NPH and regular because his endo, he just got to an endo and he's had diabetes, he's had LADA for like 10 years. They just never got around to it. I think this would be perfect. And I know we all like the bright and the shiny, and everybody was hoping for the iLet to be two-chambered and give you an A1C of 4.8. But I just feel like I'm with you. I think it's a very crowded market, and I really hope they go after people that could to benefit in such a huge way.
I don't think it's a bad system by any stretch of the imagination. I was actually in the trial, and the results that I saw from it were not bad at all. They were just not as good as what I had been used to going into it. And I think I heard that sentiment from a number of other people as well.
I just wonder, too, you're so well educated. Like, I always throw my son under the bus. And if you guys listen to the podcast, you know this. But, he's almost 18 and he does a really good job. But he would really like to not think about diabetes at all. He forgets to pre-bolus a lot. He really is not, he's like the world's okayest diabetic. And the AID systems keep him fantastically in range. But if he had this system, he could probably still think about it the same amount of not and really not do too badly, right? I mean, that's the impression I get.
Right. As long as he's not using more than, I don't know, 75-ish units a day or something like that.
Oh, that's interesting.
Insulin.
Yeah.
Obviously, just the cartridge size. I think it uses the 180 unit pen cartridges.
Got it.
So you wind up having to change those out more often if you're using more insulin.
All right. I want to come back to Beta Bionics at the end. Well, if we have time, I'm going to take a big swing about that, but we'll get to that. Maybe our listeners here could too. Let's talk about Tidepool Loop. Again, this has been in front of the FDA for a while. Most of us in the community have kind of seen this go from, an idea to the We Are Not Waiting community to Tidepool says, we're going to shepherd this to the FDA to where is it? Where is it? And I think this is the one, I said this last year. This is the bright, shining city on a hill pump company. Like, we all want this to succeed. I'm worried about this one, Chris.
The holdups and the delays definitely are cause for concern. It would be fantastic. I mean, if it does get approved,
yeah,
that sort of becomes almost a home run for the DIY community. The fact that we built this, we created it, and someone grabbed it and did the final refinements and actually shepherded it through the process of formal approval. But at its heart, it's a DIY project. Tidepool
Loop, I believe, already has agreements with Omnipod, which of course that's what it's submitted as. But it has an agreement with Medtronic. I wonder if they'd work with other pump companies. Has anything changed that you know of, Chris, about that?
Not that I've heard of, although obviously approval there would likely extend the functional life of the dash pods. I don't think the dash is going away anytime soon, but either that or it would need to be resubmitted with approval to control the Omnipod 5 pods. And then that would become you can use the Omnipod 5 with the built-in algorithm, or you can get Tidepool Loop to control the pod externally.
Mike and I talked about Tidepool Loop back in 2021. We basically had the same kind of conversation that Chris and I had that you just heard, so I won't rehash that. And interestingly, Mike and I also had the same conversation that you're about to hear with me and Chris about Eli Lilly and the pump market. Lilly is looking for a new pump partner now for the second time since 2017. That's when they announced a partnership with DECA. They were going to come out with a brand new insulin pump. I actually saw that. We were invited to a blogger and podcaster summit, and they showed us a prototype, along with pens and, what they call an ecosystem. DECA is led by Dean Kamen, who is probably most widely well known as inventing the Segway. But he is the inventor of the first insulin infusion pump back in the 1970s. It's a really interesting partnership. But Lilly dissolved it and entered into a partnership with Ypsomed. Ypsomed makes a great pump. They use it in Europe. It's actually part of an AID system with a CGM and, AID software and all of that. The trick to both of these pump systems and pen systems is that they were going to be proprietary. You could only use Lilly insulin in them. You could only use Humalog and that brand of insulin. But the Lilly-Ypsomed partnership fell apart a couple of weeks ago. So I brought the question to Chris.
What is going on here? I personally don't think Ypsomed is going to have a problem finding a partner. I guess they want a partner because they want to keep it proprietary, but the insulin cartridges they use. But is Lilly just going to concentrate on their smart pens and their new system? I mean, to me, that seems like the easy swing for them. Any thoughts on Lilly and a new pump partner?
I'm not sure that really having a pump partner as an insulin manufacturer makes a lot of sense for anybody.
I don't get it.
I get it. I get it from sort of the vertical integration standpoint. But I mean, if you just look at least in the U.S. where the revenue comes from, if you're a pump manufacturer, you make about half of the lifetime revenue from the pump when you sell the pump itself the first time, if we're talking about a durable pump. And then the other half comes from the continuing supply sales, the cartridges, the infusion sets, all of that other stuff. Where does being an insulin manufacturer fit into that? If you've got an insurer that doesn't have you on their preferred list as a partner, just the market dynamics don't really work in your favor to have it be a viable, large-scale thing, at least in the U.S.?
I don't know. I'm with you. I thought it was odd when we all went there and saw their fancy office in Cambridge. And I think it was odd when they partnered with Ipsum. And I get it in a way. But
well, it's vertical integration.
Right. I know.
You own the entire thing. You own the insulin. You own the delivery system. You own all, and so from that standpoint, it does make sense. But just the way that things are paid for in the U.S. sort of works against you.
Exactly. Well, my thought was, and again, you really know much more about this than I do, but I feel like, okay, if I get this Lilly pump and I can only put Lilly insulin in it, right? Well, what happens when my insurance changes next year, right? And my pump is a 4-year pump or something, but then, my insurance switches me to Humalog or Novolog the next year. I'm sorry. You know what I mean? It just keeps switching me. And
or to whatever California comes up with.
Yeah, right? Or Civica, or, something else. What happens if it switches you off of the proprietary insulin? I just think that that's something that, as you said, it doesn't really work in the U.S. So we'll see. And again, Ipsomed now looking for a partner in what is becoming, I don't want to say a crowded pump market. When Benny was diagnosed, there were something like 6 pumps available. And in the last couple of years, there have only been 3 in the U.S. So it's getting more crowded, but not, I don't know. I feel like there's still a little bit of room. On my list here, Omnipod 5 for iPhone. In other words, any predictions for when no separate receiver will be needed? And this is a little tricky because there are a lot of devices, right? I mean, when you're talking about something like this, I don't even know how many different phone models there are that they would have to go through. But any thoughts on timeline for compatibility?
Well, compatibility for iPhones is easier than it is for Android, especially as far as getting a lot of phones approved basically all at once.
Right.
I mean, you've got a limited number of models that are supported that you need to worry about. Almost everybody is always running the latest version of the operating system, so you don't have those concerns about the sort of fractured ecosystem that the phones exist in, the same way that you do with the Android phones. I just don't know where insulin is in the process. It's kind of out there. I mean, are they hiring iOS developers to?
Oh, you're so measured. I'm just going to say August.
I think I would go. I think it'll come by the end of the year. I think August, good a prediction as any.
Why not, right?
Just because that's such a large segment of the market. I mean, I personally know someone who's an iPhone user who got the Omnipod 5, and they are already frustrated about having to carry around the separate PDM. Why can't I do this all from my phone? This is stupid.
Yeah.
There are advantages to having a separate device.
Oh, sure.
I'll be honest, like my primary phone is an iPhone, but I actually have an Android phone that exists just for my diabetes management, that runs the Dexcom app and then runs the app that controls the pump. So I carry 2 phones, but the diabetes phone mostly just stays in my pocket. As long as it's close enough that it doesn't lose signal, it's fine.
I wrote next was Eversense, which is just the implantable CGM, which is now good under the skin for 6 months. We had an episode with them where they are really thinking down the road. And this is I'm not going to ask you to predict because it's farther in the future, where they really are talking about putting everything under the skin, including the transmitter, so that you might have to scan at some point, but you wouldn't have to remove that transmitter. It would truly all be all in one under the skin, but that's a ways off. Do you see interoperability coming for these guys? Do you think they're going to have as many hangups as we've seen along the way for Libre, maybe smoother sailing? Any idea with Eversense?
I think, honestly, their biggest challenge is, again, sort of just the reimbursement model in the U.S. How do you pay for it? I mean, everything else, you're buying a product. And with the Eversense, you actually have to, you're going into the doctor's office and having them implant it. So you need to obviously pay the physician for the procedure. And then, again, how do you capture sort of the recurring costs? You're not, selling disposable stuff.
Right.
So I think it's the market dynamics are going to be tough. And without a large enough installed base, nobody's going to want to bother to put forth the effort to integrate with the product.
I got to tell you, just from a user standpoint, and Benny does not wrestle anymore, but that would have been a dream when he was wrestling. All sports are tough. That was the hardest for us. Everything was just slipping off of him. It's gross.
No, I'll be honest. I would love to have an Eversense.
Oh, yeah.
Especially once they get to the having it be there for a year. That's huge. You don't need to worry about the sensor failures or a lot of the other stuff that can crop up with the disposable systems.
One of the things that's interesting for them, too, is you do still have to calibrate twice a day, especially in the beginning. Don't quote me on exactly how long, because you don't have to calibrate twice a day for the entire 6 months. But in the beginning, you do. And for some people, it's funny to think about years past, how often everybody would check their blood sugar via finger stick, and then you went to 2 times a day with Dexcom, and now for many people, nothing. So that's a deal breaker for a lot of people. We'll see if they can work that out.
Right. With Dexcom, it's nothing except for during the 2-hour warm up.
You obviously don't have a 17-year-old. I'm not sure where his meter is.
I think I wind up doing about 8 finger pricks during the 2 hours.
Come on, really?
That's an exaggeration, but it's usually at least 2 or 3.
That's so smart.
Just so I can keep track of where things are, and I don't, have the sensor come up and all of a sudden it's telling me that I'm 400.
Oh, that never happens. I can't even imagine what you're talking about. All right, let's talk about smart pens. We really didn't talk about this too much last year, but of course, this is such an important part of the market. It's really come a long way. We already mentioned Lilly with their Tempo system. Bigfoot has really pivoted. That was a while ago they pivoted to smart pens. Anything to think or say about this? I do think that this is a really important part of the market, and I'm glad to see that it seems to be getting stronger. People who use pens deserve really good technology and integration with CGM.
Oh, I agree. My sort of thought on it is once you've got the pens giving their data into the system and you've got all the data in one place, where do you go from there? The big advantage of a pump is that you've got the continuous basal running that you can at least stop to try to avert a low. That's not an option with a pen. I mean, I suppose, the system could warn you that, you've got so much insulin on board that you're going to need to eat, so you might as well eat now or something like that. But it limits the options that you have to adjust once something is already baked into what's happening.
Yeah. I wonder, too, if some of them, and again, I don't have the experience with them, if they are smart enough and more accurate enough so that there are fewer lows. There are, it's much more precise than it was. But to your point, once it's in your system, it's in. It's very difficult to, once you have that, especially the basal insulin.
Well, and preventing lows comes down to not dosing too much insulin.
Yeah.
So then that winds up, is the pen or the system that the pen is connected to making the predictions and advising a dose, and then how accurate is that advice? In order to really sort of push that, you'd need almost a control IQ like algorithm that's suggesting a dose to people, and maybe even remotely programming the pen so that, you pick up the pen and you wave it at the phone, and the phone transmits the dose that's going to be required to the pen, and then you inject it. And so you don't necessarily have to think about the dosing. That's, I think, about the upper limit of what's going to be possible with a smart pen.
Yeah, I agree.
All right.
One of the things I did want to talk about, which is the OneDrop health sensor. I talked to Jeff Dachis, the CEO of OneDrop, about this recently, and I keep calling it a CGM. He is careful to call it a health sensor. This is basically going to be a CGM for people with type 2. And I think this is really interesting. They're developing their own, it looks like a CGM, acts like a CGM, but it won't probably be approved to dose insulin in the same way. I'm not even sure what I mean by that, but he is developing this for type 2. And I really think that this is a big market.
It is. The concern I would have, though, is with the Dexcom and the Libre and the other super high quality sensors that are super high precision sensors, they're out there continuing to get less and less expensive. I'm wondering where the squeeze happens. At what point is it, do you just tack with it? If you're type 2, we're going to give you a Libre rather than worrying about this other company. I mean, having it not officially be a CGM, I don't know if that might have advantages as far as getting it through the FDA and making it available to more people. There may be more of the consumer health market that opens up.
Yeah, I think OneDrop, if they're going to be successful with this, it'll be because they have their whole, I hate to call it an ecosystem, but they do have one. And if they could sell it as part of a whole package, you get a coach, you get a meter, you get a CGM, you get this stuff delivered to you. Insurance will take care of it all as one bundle, right? I think that that's the way that they'll do it. And I think that of all the people we know in the diabetes community, they're all who have pushed products through, they're all tenacious, they're all really smart. Jeff Dachis, man, he has passion. And I think that he's angry. He's so angry about how type 2s are underserved. I really feel like just on his chutzpah alone, I will plant a flag here and say that the OneDrop sensor will be available as part of a bundle mid-2024. I'm going to put that out there. Why not?
That sounds like a reasonable timeline to me.
Yeah, right? I think that's good.
And as I said, I think there's a lot of insights that can be gained from that type of system. Or maybe, what are you eating for breakfast? You're getting this huge spike. Oh, you're eating cereal? Well, maybe try a couple of eggs.
Right. Right. And you think that stuff's obvious, but look at all the people who put on, actually, this is a good thing to end on here. All the people who are out there now, all these influencers wearing CGMs who do not have diabetes, which I still think the solution to that is treat it like the Tom's Shoe Company. If you're listening, all you, Levels and all you companies out there that sell CGMs to people without diabetes, every time you sell one to those people, donate one to the diabetes community because it's ridiculous. You see all these influencers who are like, I'm going to eat fast food. Oh my goodness, my blood sugar went up. It's so silly. But those markets are booming. I think people are very excited about it. Chris, do you think that's a fad that's here to stay?
Well, I think the overall sort of consumer health fad has been around forever and will continue to be around forever.
Yeah.
Let's face it, we've had vitamin supplements pushed on us for as long as I've been alive.
Yeah. That's a good point. Some of the most popular products like cereals we eat and drinks that we think of as soft drinks started out as tonics and health remedies.
Right. And at the same time, the end result of all of it is that Americans have the most expensive urine on the planet.
Chris cracked me up there, right? He's right. He's not wrong, is he? Oh, my goodness. But Mike and I chatted about something similar last year. I'm going to make a prediction on this. I think that we're going to see summer of 2021, a product come out with a claim of non-invasive glucose monitoring. It's going to be something you can buy. It's going to be something that goes on your wrist, and it is not going to work well. But it will show you a number to the point where they will, I almost said pump and dump like a stock thing. Like they will be able to, it will show you a number to the point where people will invest in it. And they'll say like, it's version 1. And, the same way this, the Ring will track your sleep. Or, like my bed tries to track my sleep now, Mike. I don't know how accurate that is, but I'm not dosing insulin based on my sleep. So what do I care? So I think the wristwatch will come out this year, summertime. It won't work. People won't care. They'll make $1 billion and those investors will sell it and get out. We will have a real watch down the road at some point, but not this year. We'll continue the conversation with one or two more predictions and a little bit of a rant on my part. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And Dexcom has a diabetes management software called Clarity. Do you use this? Because I got to be honest with you, for a very long time, I thought it was just something our endo could use. But it is really helpful. I've had it on my phone for a couple of years. You can use it on both the desktop or as an app. It's an easy way to keep track of the big picture. And I find I use it a lot when we're adjusting things, which felt like it was nonstop there for a while, especially in middle school. Clarity really helps us see longer term trends and helps us not overreact to every, single hour, every single day. The overlay reports help put context to Benny's glucose levels and patterns. And when you share the reports with your care team, it's easy for them to get a great idea of what's going on and how they can better help. Managing diabetes is never easy, but I feel like we have one of the best CGM systems working for us. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo.
I said earlier, and I'm trying to keep this to an hour, but I said earlier I was going to ask you to take a big swing. Do you think Bionics is ever going to come out with their dual-chambered pump?
I think it may hinge on the success of the single hormone iteration.
Yeah.
And whether that's enough to sort of give them enough additional runway to get it out. I really think that honestly, a dual chamber pump or a dual hormone pump will likely be a component of the ultimate solution to really maintaining super tight control, especially in the absence of any vast improvements in insulin and how quickly it can act once it's infused. I think you are likely going to need that glucagon to sort of hit the brakes when you're coming down. So I think it's possible. I hope it's possible, but it's going to depend. And it may even be that they need to do another round of investment or two to raise some more funds to sort of get over that hurdle.
Yeah, I go back and forth. I have days where I think it's absolutely going to happen. It's so great. What a terrific idea. And then I have days where I see that the automated system my son uses hasn't let him go below 65 in 2 months. And I'm like, well, but we're not as tight as other people are. So I know if you like to keep it at like 75 to 90, you're probably going lower a little bit more. So I don't know.
At this point in the Twitter space, we had a listener come on. We had a couple of listeners, actually. We got to talking about what people really want to see, features the manufacturers may think of as too small or too niche to include or too pie in the sky. You can hear the whole Twitter space, I believe, over on Twitter. If you have any trouble finding that over on the Diabetes Connections Twitter account, just let me know. We obviously edited this down for time and also for quality. The listeners who chimed in, the sound quality was really not that great. I think that's my fault. But regardless, Chris and I tried to kind of react to that and put in our own 2 cents.
I mean, that stuff obviously isn't out there in the mainstream yet. And who knows if it'll ever wind up getting integrated into something that winds up being FDA approved, or how long it'll take if it does, or anything else along those lines. But there are people working on this.
And I hope, as you said, you've just popped in here and you're here on Twitter, you're not using your real name. I hope you continue to follow and, continue to take part in these conversations for sure. And at 9 o'clock tonight, in an hour, it's 9 o'clock my time, Eastern, there's DSMA, Diabetes Social Media Advocacy. I should have said something in the beginning, but I forgot. But if you're on Twitter, you want to stick around, take a break, go to the bathroom. We're going to wrap this up in a minute. But then stick around for DSMA, which is a fabulous, long-running, 10 years, 11 years, 12 years, who knows, Twitter chat. So please stay plugged in. But I would say about those remarks is yes, and to everything Chris said as well. But what drives me bananas is maybe we have this and I just don't know. I am always stunned that there are not more devices that are more accessible for people who have trouble seeing, have trouble hearing, and have trouble with dexterity. Knock on wood, I don't live with diabetes, but my son does, my husband does, and I worry about them getting older, both of them. And I already have a lot of listeners who tell me they love the podcast because they cannot see. They're listening to podcasts. I have some podcast listeners, quote unquote, who are deaf, who read the transcripts. I am so far behind on transcripts, so I really try to service them that way. But why wouldn't you more? I mean, there was a meter that talked a few years ago. Why can't you flip a button on your pump and have it talk to you? Or do like a hey, I don't want to wake up your devices, but hey, device, give me this much insulin. I understand it's hard because if someone said the wrong thing, blah, blah, blah. But that's obviously, I get all hot and bothered about that. I just think there should be more accessible stuff, Chris.
I agree, especially given that so much of the community deals with complications.
Yeah. I'm going to start to wrap this up. Chris, let me ask you, I have a closing thought that was prompted by that last speaker. Anything that you'd like to chime in on?
I mean, I guess my sort of thought is just overall, nothing huge. It'll be great if we get the iLet in 2023.
Yeah.
It'll be great if we get the 780G in 2023. I don't see either of those devices as being truly revolutionary. They're more evolutionary, but they're moving things in the right direction. So most of what I see in 2023, my closing thought, I guess, is just that it'll be smaller steps, but there will still be progress.
That sounds about right, because we were waiting during COVID for these big approvals and differences. And of course, going back to the first AID systems, being really excited about that. So I think incremental progress sounds about where we are, which is still terrific. And my only closing thought would be, listen, I don't have diabetes, as I have said. So I appreciate you all kind of letting me be part of this community and talking about all of this. My jam is 100%. I got so excited when our last speaker was talking about is information. I love learning this stuff. I love trying to bring it to you. I love finding out stuff. My show has never been about advice. I'm not a good mom that way, and that I want to tell you guys what to do. But I hope that if you hear of interesting things, if there's something you'd like me to cover, if there are questions you'd like me to ask, it is such a privilege to bring your questions to CEOs, to the people who make this stuff. And I don't know if we've moved the needle at all, but at least we know that we get our questions to them. So I would just say thank you so much. I really feel like it is a privilege and a responsibility to bring those questions to people and host things like this. As Chris said right at the beginning, I don't know if we'll do more of this. I'm not a big fan of what's happening on Twitter right now. I am a big fan of being able to meet up like this. This is one reason why I had the opportunity to do this on Clubhouse. I didn't like their terms and conditions. I didn't like their privacy stuff. I never hosted on Clubhouse. I'm nervous about Twitter, but if we can do it again, we will. If we find other mediums to do this, I'd love to have you. So let me know. And I think we're going to wrap it up. Chris, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks for having me, Stacey. This was fun.
I really appreciate it. And stay in touch, everybody. I'm going to go out really awkwardly because never done a Twitter space. Don't know how to end one. But thanks so much for joining me. Bye. Have a great night. Join DSMA at 9 p.m. Bye.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Big thanks to everybody who tuned into that Twitter space and participated. Depending on how things go on Twitter, I may do it again. It was a lot of fun. I will tell you some inside baseball on what happened to the sound quality there. It was really just completely my error. I have backups upon backups here, especially when I'm doing something new like that, because Twitter will record for you. And that's actually the recording I wound up using, which was not the recording I intended to use. But I left an external microphone on over here in my studio, in my setup, and that caused all sorts of weird things to happen. It caused a gigantic echo on one of the backup recordings, and it caused a weird feedback on another one. So lesson learned, mute all the microphones except the only one you're on, which on Twitter Spaces, which was on my phone, just happened to be my really crappy headphones, just the wired earbud things that used to come with your phone. I don't even know if they come anymore with your phone. You can get them for like $7.99 at Walgreens. That's why you hear a lot of little noises of me touching the wires, and it doesn't sound so good. Anyway, if you've listened this long, thank you so much for joining me. We do have a newscast. Our newscasts are now every other week. So we will have in the news this Friday, a summary of all the headlines and stories in the diabetes community. I'm excited to bring you that again. We had a nice break. I hope your year is off to a terrific start. We have so many great episodes cooking for you. I'm thrilled to be back at this again. I got so much going on. I got book stuff. I got Mom's Night Out coming up at the end of this month. Holy cow. But how lucky am I to be able to do it? All right. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here in just a couple of days. Happy New Year. And I hope in 2023, you can be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.